Do you feel like you're doing everything right, but nothing is moving forward? Have you ever felt stuck, as if your life is on pause, while everything around you keeps advancing? In this video, you'll understand why this phase is not a mistake, nor abandonment, and what God is actually doing while you feel like nothing is happening. What if this standstill is actually the most important moment of your life? What if God is working precisely in the areas that will define your future, but in a way you still can't see? Here, you'll discover what is being shaped within you, what is being removed, and why this is essential before any external change can take place. If you're tired, confused, or starting to wonder whether it's still worth continuing, this video may completely change the way you see this season. Because maybe you're not stuck, maybe you're being prepared. Before we continue, it's important for you to know that this video was created with the help of artificial intelligence, tools not to replace the message, but to expand its reach. Every word here was crafted with intention to help you see more clearly what you may be living through right now, but haven't fully understood yet. There is a kind of pain that almost no one sees, because it doesn't show on the outside. It's the pain of trying, of putting in the effort, of doing what you believe is right, and still, nothing seems to move forward, and that kind of exhaustion feels different. You keep following your routine. You keep believing, keep praying, keep trying to hold on to your faith. But deep inside, a quiet question begins to rise. Why does it feel like nothing is happening for me? And the more time passes, the harder it becomes to ignore that feeling. Because it's not a lack of effort. It's not a lack of intention. You know, you're doing your part. And still, life doesn't seem to respond. The hardest part isn't even the waiting itself. It's watching other people move forward while you remain in the same place. People who started later, people who don't even seem to try as hard. And yet, they are living what you once hoped for. This begins to create a silent comparison, and that comparison slowly starts to affect your mind. You begin to wonder if something is wrong with you, if you missed an opportunity, if you made the wrong decisions, and at an even deeper level, a spiritual doubt starts to form. Not necessarily an obvious doubt, but something more subtle. Something like, is God still with me? Is he still listening? Or have I been forgotten? These questions are not spoken out loud, but they are there, and they carry weight, because you still believe, but you don't understand what is happening. This is the phase where faith doesn't disappear, but it starts to grow tired, not because of God, but because of a lack of clarity. You keep believing, but you can't see direction, and that creates an internal tension that's hard to explain. It's like being in motion, but going nowhere, like running, but never arriving, like waiting, without knowing exactly for what. The Bible describes something very similar in Psalm 42:1. I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. Notice, there is waiting. There is a season where nothing seems to happen, but the verse doesn't begin with an answer. It begins with waiting, a waiting that often feels too long, too silent, too confusing, and maybe what you're living right now is not the absence of an answer, but exactly this kind of waiting. A season where, on the outside, everything seems still, but something not yet visible is being prepared. Because not every silence means absence, and not every nothing happening means nothing is being done. Sometimes the quietest season of your life is also the most strategic one, but that's not easy to see while you're still inside it. There is a difference that can completely change the way you see this phase, and most people never stop to notice it. There is a difference between being delayed and being held back, because when you believe you're delayed, everything inside you becomes anxious. You feel like you need to rush, catch up, do something urgently to get out of this situation. But when you understand that you're being held back, your perception shifts completely. Being held back doesn't mean something went wrong. It means someone greater is intervening in your timing. And that doesn't happen by accident. The problem is that, while you're inside this process, it feels like the opposite. It feels like blockage. It feels like resistance. It feels like things simply don't flow, don't move, don't come together. And this is where many people misinterpret what's happening, because what feels like delay is often protection. How many times have you wanted something to happen faster? How many times have you asked for an opportunity, a change, an answer. And it simply didn't come. In that moment, it feels like frustration. It feels like God isn't listening. But there is a possibility that almost no one considers. What if what you want right now is something you're not yet able to sustain? Proverbs 16:1 says, "To humans belong the plans of the heart, but from the Lord comes the proper answer of the tongue." Notice, the desire exists, the plan exists, but the release doesn't depend only on you. There is a time when God allows you to move forward, but there is also a time when He holds you back. And that holding back is not rejection, it's alignment. Because moving forward at the wrong time doesn't speed up the process. It only increases the risk. You might even get where you wanted, but you won't have the structure to remain there. And that's exactly why some doors don't open. Not because you don't deserve it, not because you're not capable, but because it's not yet time to sustain what you're asking for. This requires a deeper kind of trust. A trust that doesn't depend on external evidence. A trust that remains even when nothing seems to be happening. And that's the hardest part. Because trusting when everything is working is easy, but trusting when everything feels stuck requires maturity. Maybe what you call a blockage today is actually God's care preventing you from moving forward before you're ready. Maybe what you call delay is God positioning you in ways you can't yet see for something that wouldn't make sense right now. And that doesn't remove your pain. It doesn't remove your exhaustion. But it completely changes the meaning of this phase. Because in reality, you're not being stopped. You're being prepared. There is something that may be difficult to accept, but it explains much of what you are experiencing right now. Not everything you desire, you are ready to sustain. And this has nothing to do with apparent ability. Many times, on the outside, you already seem prepared. You have the desire, the vision, the intention. But on the inside, there are still areas that are not aligned. And God does not work only with what is visible. He works with what will sustain what becomes visible later. Because there is no point in reaching a new level if your internal structure still belongs to the previous one. That doesn't create progress. It creates instability. Ecclesiastes 3:1 says, "There is a time for everything, and a season for every purpose under heaven." Notice, it's not just about having a purpose. It's about there being a right time for that purpose to unfold. And that timing is not random. It is directly connected to your level of preparation. You may want something now, but that doesn't mean now is the right moment. There is a difference between desire and readiness. And that difference is exactly where God is working, because sometimes what you want the most today could destabilize you if it came right now. It could expose weaknesses that haven't been addressed yet. It could place you in a position you are not yet able to sustain emotionally, spiritually, or even mentally. And God will not give you something that would break you, even if you are asking for it sincerely. Look at biblical stories like Joseph. He received a promise early, but went through a long process before living what was promised. Or David, who was anointed king, but still faced years of preparation before stepping into that position. What existed between the promise and the fulfillment? Process. And that process was not delay, it was construction. There is something being developed within you right now that you still cannot see. It may be emotional maturity. It may be control over impulses. It may be a reduced dependence on external validation. It may be a stronger faith, less dependent on circumstances. And all of this remains invisible until the moment it begins to sustain something greater. Maybe you are asking for external change, while God is focused on internal transformation. And as slow as that may seem, it is exactly what will define what you are able to sustain in the future. Because what comes quickly, without preparation, is also lost quickly. And what God is building in you right now is not just for you to reach a new level. It is for you to remain there. So, instead of seeing this phase as a blockage, maybe it is time to start asking, what is being built inside me that I haven't noticed yet? Because the answer to that completely changes the way you see the time you are living in. And if this message is making sense to you, if in some way it is bringing clarity to what you are going through right now, consider subscribing to the channel. There are many other messages like this, designed to help you understand, grow, and move through seasons like this with greater awareness and direction. There is something happening within you, and you may be calling it exhaustion, pressure, or even burnout. But in many cases, this pressure you feel is not just the weight of life. It is part of a deeper process shaping you from the inside out, because everything that needs to grow with strength goes through some level of pressure. And this is not exclusive to the spiritual life. It is a principle that shows up in many areas. What is not tested rarely becomes strong, stable, or capable of holding weight. The problem is that when this pressure comes, the first reaction is almost always resistance. You try to relieve it, escape it, find a way back to comfort, and that is natural. No one enjoys feeling pressured or exposed. But there is an important distinction here, and understanding it changes everything. Not all pressure is destructive. Some pressure is deeply constructive. James 1:2-3 says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance." Notice, pressure is not the end of the story. It is the means through which something essential is produced within you. Pressure reveals things that would remain hidden in a comfortable environment. It exposes weaknesses, thought patterns, emotional dependencies, things that would never surface if everything were easy. And this can be deeply uncomfortable, because many times you begin to notice reactions within yourself that you wish you didn't have. Reactions that you didn't even realize were there until now. Rising anxiety, growing impatience, a strong need for control, fear of losing, fear of not moving forward. All of it starts to intensify in a way that feels overwhelming. And when that happens, it's easy to assume something is wrong with you. It's easy to think you are regressing, losing control, or becoming weaker. But this is not a sign that you are getting worse. It is a sign that something is being brought to the surface, something that was already there. But hidden beneath comfort, routine, or distraction, what shows up under pressure is exactly what needs to be adjusted before the next level. It is as if God is allowing these things to surface, not to expose you, but to prepare you. Because it's not just about getting somewhere new. It's about who you will be when you get there, and whether you will have the structure, the maturity, and the stability to remain in that place. And God uses this kind of process to strengthen your internal foundation, plan your mind, your emotions, your decisions, so that when the opportunity comes, you are not driven by instability, insecurity, or impulsive choices. Because what is built internally determines what can be sustained externally. What grows under pressure tends to become more solid, more resilient, more aware, more grounded, more prepared to carry the weight that naturally comes with growth and responsibility. And maybe that is exactly what is happening to you right now. This is not just a difficult moment. It is a formative, strategic, intentional one. A moment that is shaping you in ways that will only make sense later. But there is a critical point here. If you interpret this phase as punishment, you will resist it. You will try to escape it. You will fight against it. And in doing so, you may miss what it is trying to teach you. But if you interpret it as process, something shifts. You begin to cooperate with it. You begin to engage with it differently, with more awareness and less resistance. And that shift in perspective changes the entire experience. Because instead of trying to escape this phase as quickly as possible, you begin to observe. You begin to notice what is being revealed, what is being adjusted, what is being strengthened within you, layer by layer. And that doesn't make the pressure lighter, but it makes it meaningful, directed, understandable. It gives purpose to what once felt like chaos. Because now you understand that you are not being crushed. You are being shaped with intention, precision, and purpose. And once you understand that, you stop merely enduring this moment and start moving through it with awareness, with maturity, and with a sense of direction that wasn't there before. There is a part of the process that almost no one likes, but it is absolutely essential. Before moving you forward, God begins removing things that cannot go with you. And this is not always obvious, because many of these things don't seem wrong at first. Some of them even made sense in earlier stages of your life. Some may have even helped you get to where you are now. But what brought you here is not always what will sustain you at the next level. And this is exactly where the process becomes more sensitive. Because God begins to work in areas you didn't expect, not just external circumstances, but internal structures. Hebrews 12:11 says, "No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it." Notice, at the moment, it seems like a loss, but later, it reveals its purpose, because what is being removed right now is not being taken away to harm you. It is being removed to align you. Many times, what God begins to remove are invisible dependencies. Things you didn't even realize were influencing your decisions. It may be the need for control, that feeling that everything has to happen your way, in your timing under the conditions you believe are ideal. It may be the need for validation, that constant search for recognition, approval, external confirmation, as if your worth depended on it. It may be anxiety, that internal urgency that makes you want to rush processes, force outcomes, accelerate what still needs time. And the problem with these things is not just the discomfort they create. It's the impact they would have if you carried them into the next level. Because the higher the level, the greater the weight. And the greater the weight, the more these weaknesses begin to surface. That's why God doesn't just prepare you to receive something new. He prepares you to sustain what is coming. And for that to happen, some things need to be removed. Maybe you are experiencing losses that don't make sense right now. Doors that have closed without explanation. Connections that have faded in ways you didn't expect. Plans that simply didn't move forward, no matter how much effort you put in. And your first reaction is to interpret this as failure, as setback, as something going wrong, as if somehow you missed something or did something incorrectly along the way. But there is another possibility, one that is harder to accept, but deeper in meaning. What if this is actually cleansing? What if what you are calling loss is actually God removing what could not go with you into what comes next? Not everything that leaves your life is a loss. Some things are obstacles, being taken out of the way, things that would limit you, distract you, or even destabilize you later. Some structures need to be broken so something stronger can be built in their place. Some dependencies need to be exposed so you don't carry them into a level where their impact would be much greater, much more damaging. And this process is not comfortable because it involves letting go. It involves adjustment. It involves releasing things you once believed were essential, things you once trusted, things that once felt secure. But there is a truth that changes everything. God does not remove to leave you empty. He removes to make space. Space for something more aligned, more stable, more consistent with what He is building in you. Not just for now, but for what is ahead. So instead of asking only, "Why is this leaving my life?" maybe it's time to ask a deeper question. Could this really go with me to the next level? Because that answer can give you a clarity you didn't have before. A clarity that changes not only how you see the loss, but how you see the process itself. There is a specific point in this process where most people give up. And the most dangerous part is that it doesn't look like a decisive moment. It doesn't feel like a major turning point. It just feels like another hard day, another exhausting phase that never seems to end. But in reality, this is the most critical moment of all. This is where accumulated exhaustion starts to weigh heavily. It's no longer just a difficult season. It becomes a constant feeling of weariness that follows you every day. You've already tried, already waited, already adjusted, and you begin to feel like maybe nothing will change. And it is exactly in this moment that decisions begin to be made, not based on clarity, but based on exhaustion, not based on truth, but on how heavy everything feels. Galatians 6:9 says, "Let us not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest, if we do not give up." Notice, there is a promise of harvest, but it is conditioned on something very few are able to sustain, not giving up in the middle of the process. The problem is that when you are tired, your perception changes. What once made sense begins to feel pointless. What once had purpose begins to feel like a waste of time, like something no longer worth continuing. And this is where many abandon the process. Not because they were on the wrong path, but because they misinterpreted the moment they were in. They confused silence with absence, delay with rejection, process with failure, and overchimney these interprets shape how they severing, including themselves, their identity, and their future. And that misinterpretation leads to rushed decisions. People change direction at the wrong time. They walk away from something that wasn't finished. They abandon something that was about to produce results, often without even realizing how close they actually were. Because there is a truth that is hard to see when you are inside the process. The hardest phase is often the closest to the breakthrough. The pressure intensifies, the uncertainty grows, and everything feels heavier right before something shifts. But it doesn't feel like a breakthrough. It feels like a limit. It feels like you've reached the end of what you can handle, like you've given everything you had. And that is exactly why so many people break here. Not because they lack potential, but because they misread the moment they are in and assume it means the end. Because continuing requires something beyond motivation. It requires conviction. It requires a conscious decision to remain, even without visible signs of progress, even when your emotions are telling you to stop, to give up, to walk away. Maybe you are at that point right now. Maybe you are tired not because you are far, but because you are close. Close to something shifting, close to something aligning, close to something finally making sense in a way it never did before. And that changes everything about how you interpret this moment. Because if you are close, giving up now is not just stopping. It is interrupting something that has already been built over time. Something that has been forming quietly, consistently, even without your full awareness. And that is why this point is so decisive. Not because it is the end, but because it defines who continues until what was started is completed, and who walks away just before the outcome appears. You don't need to have all the answers right now. You don't need to feel motivated every day. But you do need to make one clear decision. Do not walk away at the wrong moment. Because many times, it is not a lack of ability that stops someone from moving forward. It is giving up at the moment closest to change, when everything feels uncertain and unclear. And maybe that is the one thing you need to protect right now. Not your certainty, but your decision to remain. Underscore after all of this, there is a truth that begins to become clearer. Even if you still can't see all the details, you are not stuck. You have not been forgotten. And most importantly, you are not off the path. What you are living right now is not emptiness. It is a process that is not happening only around you, but within you. And that is what makes all the difference. Because what is happening inside you today is what will sustain what is still to come. Philippians 1-6 says, "He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus." Notice, you did not start this process on your own, and you are not the one who has to sustain it by yourself, even when it feels like you are. Something has already been started. Something is already in motion. Even when you don't perceive it, even when you don't feel it, even when everything seems silent, and that brings a different kind of security, not based on what you see, but on what you begin to understand over time. Maybe you've spent too much time measuring your life only by what is visible, by results, by external changes, by immediate answers. But God operates in a different logic, deeper, more structured, more intentional than what we can measure in the moment. He builds before he reveals. He prepares before he positions. He strengthens before he releases. And many times, he transforms in silence, so that when something appears, it has the foundation to remain without collapsing under pressure. And that means what you are not seeing right now may be exactly what is securing what you will experience later. It may be what is protecting you from losing what you haven't even received yet. You are not waiting for something to begin. You are already inside something that has begun. And that completely changes the way you see this moment, if you allow yourself to recognize it. Because instead of seeing this phase as delay, you begin to see it as intentional development. Instead of interpreting it as blockage, you begin to understand it as direction being adjusted with precision. And that doesn't completely remove the doubt, but it transforms the way you deal with it. Because now there is a foundation. There is an understanding that a purpose is being built even without immediate evidence. Maybe you still don't see the change. Maybe you still don't feel the progress. Maybe there are still unanswered questions. that seem to linger. But that doesn't mean nothing is happening. It simply means that what is being done right now is not yet visible. And many times, that is exactly what sustains what will become visible later, in a way that is stable and lasting. Because what is built with depth rarely begins in a visible way. It begins quietly, internally, almost imperceptibly. So instead of giving up, instead of rushing, instead of trying to force something that is not yet the time, maybe what you need now is to adjust your perspective with greater awareness and intention, not to ignore what you feel, but to better understand what is happening behind what you feel, because you may be much closer than you think. And giving up now would mean stopping right before seeing what has already begun to be built within you. And if this message made sense to you, if it brought clarity, if it helped you see this moment in a more mature and conscious way, consider subscribing to the channel. Here, you'll find content that will help you understand processes like this, develop your faith with more direction, and move through difficult seasons with greater stability and confidence. And maybe, after all of this, the most important question is no longer, when will this change? But rather, what has God already started within me that I had not yet noticed?